Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on raptors, owl boxes, and raptor perches. I'm Carolyn Tricino, the director of Poison-Free Agoura, and our team is excited that you are attending our 5th webinar. Tonight, Kathy Schoonmaker of the National Park Service will share information on raptors in the Santa Monica Mountains and National Park Service studies on raptor perches and owl boxes. Bambi Corso Steinmeier of Poison-Free Conejo Valley will introduce us to her next door Thousand Oaks Owl Box enthusiast group, and we'll learn what communities are experiencing with owl boxes and raptor perches. I'll finish by sharing information I've learned from installing raptor perches and introducing you to our pilot owl box program in Agoura Hills. We designed our presentation for 30 minutes. After the presentation, we have 15 minutes to answer questions. Please use the Q&A and chats during the presentation to submit questions, and we'll address them in that time frame. We'll be recording this webinar. Now let's hear from Kathy Schoonmaker.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. Welcome, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about just some of the common raptors you can find here in the Santa Monica Mountains, the different birds that we see maybe on a daily basis, especially if you live in Agoura Hills or anywhere adjacent to the Santa Monica Mountains. So a raptor is a bird that primarily hunts other animals. You might consider them as hawks, owls, eagles, and falcons. We have a few, I'm going to go through a few of them here just so you can get an idea of what these animals look like. Raptors, just one of their characteristics I wanted to clarify as well is they have that very keen eyesight. They can see from quite some distance away. They have strong feet, which have talons, great for hunting, and a curved beak for being able to rip their food apart and eat it. So probably the one you've seen the most often is the red-tailed hawk, or at least it's the one that you recognize the best, usually soaring high above us with that beautiful red tail. You can see it when it's spanned out, as well as when they bank in the sky when they're flying above and circling. Another very common hawk that we have is the red-shouldered hawk. The red-shouldered hawk is a little bit smaller and does quite well in some of these urban areas that have some tree cover. They like riparian areas and oak woodland habitats. Here's a picture of the two together so you can get a better idea of identifying the differences between them. The red-tailed hawk in this picture on the left here has that red tail, as I mentioned, and the red-shouldered hawk, though, has very spotted wing patterns that you can see. It's kind of a checkered color as well, that white and black, and then a very red chest. Some other birds that are fairly common is the Cooper's hawk. I often see the Cooper's hawk in urban areas perching up in trees. They can be pretty aggressive if they are nesting and they have young nearby. Sometimes they'll even dive bomb people to try to keep them away. The Cooper's hawk and the sharp shin can look very similar. So you have to take your time trying to identify the differences between them. And I have a couple slides to help with that. So the Cooper's hawk is actually a little bit bigger than the sharp shin. You can see the Cooper's hawk in this picture down here is a little bit on the larger size, maybe more of a crow size, whereas the sharp shin might be similar to a robin size, so quite a bit smaller. And then there's a few little differences when they're flying, but it's very hard to tell from, I would say, from the flying ability. But when they're, I like to think of it as that if you're seeing a hawk that looks like a Cooper's hawk, really look at the size of it, and does it look more like that crow size, or does it look like a smaller robin sized bird? Another common bird, which you may or may not see too often, depends on how close you live to that grassland area where there's some good open hunting fields, is the American kestrel. Also quite a small bird, similar to a little bit bigger than a sparrow, but maybe that robin size sparrow, a little bit in between of the two. Primarily, they like to eat some mice in the fields, and they'll go for bugs in the fields as well. But they're really fun birds to watch hunt. And then the white-tailed kite is also a really interesting bird to watch hunting as well. Again, they prefer that grassland habitat where there's a lot of voles. Voles seem to be one of their primary diets. And they tend to hover, which is fun too, if you can watch them hunting in their hunting abilities. I don't see the white-tailed kites too often in the urban areas or really too adjacent to urban locations, but we see them at Rancho Sierra Vista if you ever get a chance to go out to that location on the western area of the Santa Monica Mountains. And then, of course, we have our owls. This is a picture that Bambi took and sent me recently. So big question is, who's in your backyard? Well, we have barn owls, believe it or not. You may not even know they're there, and you probably won't even recognize their call because they are different than the great horned owl. And we also have the great horned owl. Here's a picture of the two together. As you can see, they look very different. The great horned owl is a much bigger bird, a little bit more on the aggressive side, whereas the barn owl is a smaller bird, petite, and definitely not as strong. And great horned owls at times will chase the barn owls out of the territory because great horned owls are extremely territorial birds. I wanted to show or play so you can listen a couple of sounds of the different types of the two different owls, because a lot of people think that the hoot hoot is the barn owl, where it's actually the great horned owl. And so here's our great horned owl. And again, that's probably the most common sound that you hear when you're hearing that owl outside. So if you're hearing this, then you have a great horned owl. The great horned owl also makes another interesting sound I'm going to play for you. It's kind of a chirping sound. And so now I'm going to play the call of the barn owl, which is quite a bit different. So you can hear they have more of a scream for their call. And here's one more call from the barn owl. Hopefully now you'll get a better understanding of the two different calls of the two different birds that are out there. One of the other things I wanted to talk a little bit real quick, touch on with this program is a little bit about the rodenticide poison. So now that we know the different birds of prey that we have out, the raptors, we also want to talk about how these raptors can be impacted by rat poisons. And the National Park Service has been studying carnivores in the area since 1996. We've been looking at bobcats, coyotes, and mountain lions, studying their urban association, diet, and causes of mortality of these animals. And during that study, when animals die, we'll do a necropsy on them to better understand their cause of death. And from that, unfortunately, we found that rat poisons has been affecting these animals. So the rodents that they eat, unfortunately, are being poisoned, and this poison is moving up the food chain. We have had several different animals be poisoned by many different compounds of rat poisons. First generation of anticoagulants, second generation of anticoagulants, plus other poisons as well. And how does this happen? People often think that the rodents that are being targeted actually die inside the bait boxes that the poisons are put in. The problem is the rodents don't die in the box. The box is just a bait box. It's just where they can go in, get that food, and then they come back out. And often they'll go in several times because they're not understanding that they're getting poisoned because they don't feel the effects of the poison for several days later. They can take up to 5 to 10 days before they'll actually die from that poison. So during that time, they're still moving around through the environment. And as they're starting to feel sick, they become easy prey for our carnivores that are out there, our predators. So our bobcats, our coyotes, our mountain lions, as well as our hawks and our owls are being poisoned by these rodents that we are actually trying to poison. So it's that unintentional poisoning, unfortunately, as it moves up the food chain. We've had over 90% of our bobcats that were in our study tested positive for rat poisons, and 95% of the mountain lions in our study tested positive as well, including we had raccoons and foxes. Now, we didn't study raptors, but we do know that 6 mountain lions have died directly from rat poisons in our study. So not just had some compounds in them, but they actually died from getting enough poison in them to kill them. Throughout the state, this has also been a problem. The state has been collecting bodies, doing necropsies on these animals, and they've had not just mountain lions, but they've had raccoons, foxes, skunks, black bears, badgers, eagles, hawks, owls, even turkey vultures, because turkey vultures are scavengers. So they also are being impacted. So as I mentioned, we haven't at the Park Service actually studied the raptors and how they've been impacted here locally by rat poisons, but there have been several studies throughout the years. And I'm just going to tell you about a couple of them. 53 birds tested from San Diego County, 49 of them tested positive, and that was 92% of that study. So, and then also just in Central Valley, they had 69% test positive as well in the Central Valley counties. 160 birds were tested in Massachusetts for a rehab center, and 86% of those birds tested positive for rodenticides, with almost 90 of them being red-tailed hawks, 100% of the great horned owls that were tested were that had rodenticide poisons, and they also tested barred owls, which they have there, and the eastern screech owl. So again, that was in Massachusetts. So you can imagine the same thing. We also put rodenticide poisonings out, and we would likely have the same results here. In New York City, a study from January 2012 to December 2018 found that 89% of the red-tailed hawks they tested in the study had rodenticide poisons as well. So some alternatives that we can choose to do. Well, first of all, we always know that you can do traps indoors, and then structure exclusion is really, really important to try to keep the rodents out, but also removing the access to food for any type of rodents, which means closing up your compost bins, picking up fruit that's fallen on the ground, pet food that's left outside, and even our bird feeders. I know our birds can be really messy. We like to look at them, but they are big. They do make a big mess. Oops. One of the other things that Ventura County Watershed Protection District did is around the levees and dams, they wanted to try using something different than using poisons. They were using poisons for a very long time and decided to do a pilot study on raptor perches, which is something that was happening in Santa Barbara County. And so they did a control site and they did a test site where they installed 14 raptor perches and some owl boxes. And they found that it showed about a 66% reduction in the rodent burrows where the raptor perches and owl boxes were installed. So it outperformed the rodenticides that were in the other site. And because it did so well, they actually ended up putting out, I think, about 200 more perches across the levees throughout the county, which I thought was really interesting and great. So they were looking at that natural control. So after that study, I thought, well, why don't we try doing some of that on some of the Park Service land and see what we could do. So we had one site that we put it up. And then unfortunately COVID hit, so everything slowed down really fast for us. But currently we do have one site up that's in one of our facilities areas where we had a huge squirrel problem along the grass area. And the big question was, well, will raptors even use the perch? Will they hunt from the perches? And will raptors actually kind of reduce that rodent population in the field? So those were some of our main questions. We did find that raptors were using the perches, which is great. We detected 5 different species came to the perch. And see, these are some of the hawks that we found. We had the Cooper's hawk, red-shouldered hawk, and then a red-tailed hawk. And their primary diet for the hawks is squirrels, gophers, and rabbits. And then we had 2 nocturnal species. We had the barn owl and the great horned owl, also using the perch. And primary diet for our nocturnal species would be gophers, rats, mice, and rabbits. So depending on what type of rodents you're trying to control, potentially perches could help. We did find that there were catching the target species we wanted them to. We have this top picture here is actually a red-shouldered hawk carrying a baby squirrel back up to the perch. We rarely get pictures of the birds actually bringing the prey back up, but it's pretty fun when we actually do get to see that success. And then we had a great horned owl bring back a gopher, which is what the lower picture is. So he has it in his beak there. And then some of the other alternatives that some people have been using, I've seen some HOAs and residents using barn owl boxes. And so I've been working with some people locally and helping them identify whether barn owls are actually nesting in those boxes. And if they are, how we can determine what these animals are actually eating as we look at what the contents of what's left in the box and owl pellets from the box as well. So there was an HOA in Thousand Oaks in 2019. They had 2 barn owl boxes that were installed, and one actually was occupied, which was great. After looking at the contents of that box, just kind of what was left, there was more, but I haven't had a chance to analyze it all. But just looking at the carcasses on the surface, we found already that there were just 15 rats detected in the box. So that was good because that was the target species they were really hoping to help reduce in that area is the rats. And so the barn owls were actually helping quite a bit, I think, with that. Now, I don't have the exact numbers because we haven't had the time yet to actually analyze that whole box. Also, a success story is Oak Park School District installed 10 barn owl nest boxes in 2019. It did take a year before some of those boxes became occupied, but at least 3 of them were occupied in 2020. So they actually had young and reproduced. Unfortunately, though, this year, none of the boxes were occupied by raptors or owls, but we did have one occupied by a squirrel, and then another one that had been used, but they did not actually end up nesting in the box. So some of the ways to monitor activity at the boxes is around the circle or entrance hole of the box. You can actually see there's rubbing. There might be some tinted color from them rubbing their beak all over it with prey on it. Scratches on the top of the box or around the box, and then you'll find pellets and feathers that have been dropped underneath the box. So I would say that some of the barn owl box challenges, if anyone's thinking about doing barn owl boxes, is placement of the box really counts. You must have available habitat for hunting for these animals. Direction of the box faces is important. Northeast is recommended. It's recommended from 12 to 16 feet high. Also, it's not recommended to have a swimming pool nearby because as the chicks fledge, they could actually end up drowning. Roosting trees are great to have nearby on your property. That way, the parents have a place to hang out as the kids get big and kind of push them out of the box. There is a potential for bees to occupy the boxes, so we suggest rubbing diatomaceous earth along the edges to keep them out. And then it's also suggested to mount on a pole versus a tree due to predators could climb the trees and actually get in the box and raid and eat the chicks or the eggs. So but I've seen them in trees as well, so it's hard to say. There's no guarantee, though, that barn owls, this is probably the biggest challenge. There's no guarantee that a barn owl is going to actually use the box. You can put it there, but it doesn't mean that they're going to find it and be able to nest in it. And then the other thing, if you are lucky enough to have them nest in the box and it becomes occupied, you are going to have to take the time to clean it. And so you should really think ahead of time. It's suggested that every year after young have fledged that you clean the boxes out, because if you don't, each year it continues to get higher and higher. And then eventually the birds will end up falling. The young will fall out of the nest box. And also it helps keep disease out as well. The other thing, if you were to put one in your yard, is to remember that these chicks can be really noisy, especially when they're in the fledging time, when they're trying to, the parents are trying to get them to go on their own. They're often do a lot of yelling and screaming to be fed. They also drop a lot of pellets all over your yard, and they may have a lot of bird droppings in your yard. So things to think about. You have to really want to love animal or barn owls to have them there. Raptor perches, there are some challenges with those as well, but they're different challenges. So raptor perch may not work in dense neighborhoods because the birds still have to have that area to be able to hunt. Again, there's still no guarantee they're going to use it, but I bet something would use it. So even if they don't use it, you'll probably have mourning doves using it or crows. The recommended height, though, for a raptor perch is 16 to 20 feet high. And then if you're going to invite raptors to come to your yard or your neighborhood, you really want to make sure that your pets are protected. So if you happen to have chickens or small dogs, you want to make sure that you're out there with them, especially at nighttime for small dogs, because great horned owls could take a small dog, and the red-tailed hawks could also go for chickens. So things to think about. Also, the main thing to remember is raptor perches and owl boxes, they don't eliminate your rodent problem. What they can do is help reduce some of the rodent activity in your area. You still need to remember to do your exclusion techniques. So it's with a raptor perch, it can be difficult to tell if anything is actually using it with the owl boxes, there's sign whether they're there or not, but the raptor perches, unless you have a wildlife camera on it to monitor, it can be really difficult. So the picture here on the right is my little setup for monitoring the raptor perches and how I'm able to get these pictures and know that these birds are coming back on a regular basis, almost daily, and using the perch to hunt the field. The one good thing about a raptor perch, though, is there is less maintenance than an owl box as well. So again, just things to consider if you are interested in controlling rodents, with barn owls or raptors. Things that you should consider is there's no guarantee they're going to use it. They can help, but you must have enough habitat for them to be able to hunt in. Remember to protect your small pets, as I mentioned. And if you're inviting owls and hawks to hunt in your neighborhood, please don't use poisons and try to educate your neighborhood. That's really one of the best things. And again, as I mentioned, it doesn't solve your problem. It helps reduce rodents. So you have to remember to keep up your techniques of rodent control: exclusion, which is seal up at entry points in your buildings, thin vegetation, remove ivy in your yards. Don't use those bird feeders, or if you do, make sure you clean them up every night because those rats really like that seed. Deterrent techniques and picking up that pet food, sealing trash and compost bins.
All of these raptors are pictures that I took in my own backyard, which, like Kathy had mentioned, they're always around and we're just not always seeing them. So we've had all kinds of different hawks. We've had great horned owls. I actually have a barn owl box, so there's pictures of them in here too, but they really are everywhere. So the way that I got started in all of this is I put up an owl box with my husband in January of 2020. And we did that after going to see the film, The Biggest Little Farm. And then we took a tour there and we saw that they had all these amazing owl boxes and bird boxes. And they talked a lot about the importance of creating these kind of safe spaces for the raptors and also how it was helping them on the farm with their rodent problems. So I started learning about owls and raptors in general and decided after we put up our box in February of 2020 to start a next door group because it sounded like fun. And we just called it the Thousand Oaks Owl Box Enthusiast Group. And it was just designed to just get the community talking with each other and sharing ideas. And I knew that there were some people locally that already had owl boxes. And so we did that. And to date, which has only been about a year and a half, we've got 470 members on Nextdoor, which is pretty exciting. And that's a lot of people because a lot of people have been really interested in finding different ways to not only be able to watch the owls, but also to have different types of rodent control opportunities. And kind of tagging on to what Kathy said, one of the first things that we did is wrote a letter and put it out on mailboxes and around the neighborhood and talk to anybody that we could talk to and let them know about the owl box being in the neighborhood, and also just to keep an eye, to be mindful about not using rodenticides because they survive on the rats and the mice, and the rodents are so crucial to their diet. So we did that and also created flyers, which is on the right here of the screen, and have been putting those up around the neighborhood as well, just to let people know in all the areas that there are hawks and owls nesting nearby. So just to be mindful about not using poisons. What happened was after the owl box had been up for many months and realizing the effects of rodenticides, and I have to say I didn't ever realize quite the way that it was changing and moving up the food chain until I became aware just from the owls and the raptors. I ended up co-founding Poison Free Canal Valley with Robin, and we have been doing this for a year now. And part of that has been I mean, part of it was obviously inspired just by having the owl box in general, but has turned into a much larger project. We actually created a website. We have a whole page just dedicated to owl boxes and raptor poles with information. We have downloads for designs and ways to speak to neighbors, things you should do, placement. And it's been really, really fun for us to be able to share stuff like that with all of the local community, because people really do care about what's happening to the wildlife. They just don't always know. So our goal is to educate and to raise awareness around the effects of rodenticides, not just on the raptors, of course, but all the way up the food chain. We have, there's a picture of a yard sign that we created, and we have these all around the Canal Valley. We've distributed over 250 of those that are laid out from Simi Valley to Newberry Park and everything in between. And we are also part of CARP, which is Cities Against Rat Poison. So we're part of a larger group with the same goal of raising awareness around the effect of rodenticides on our wildlife and our raptors. In 2020, we held our first, it was an owl box kind of / poison-free meet and greet group. And we did it at a local park. Kathy, it was amazing. She came out there and she spoke to everybody and answered questions for well over an hour about owl boxes and raptor perches and rodenticides. And it was really great just to pull everybody together and to be able to share the information that we had, because so many people, again, are so interested in doing this. So to date, in the Nextdoor group that I'm aware of, we have at least 25 people who have put up owl boxes. So that's pretty exciting, because you've got a whole community of people who are also trying to include that in their rodent control. We also have had some, this is only 3 of them, but we've had some really nice mentions and pictures from the local community who sends in wildlife photos, and the Acorn has been putting them in every few weeks with a little information about the wildlife and the animal, and just a reminder from Poison-Free Canal Valley not to use rodenticides. Lessons learned. Kathy went over a lot of this. Owl boxes need cleaning if you're going to have one, and it can be very expensive. We've been really looking more and more into the raptor perches, because you can put them almost anywhere. They're very easy to keep and to have. So a lot of people, it works better to have the perches than it does the boxes. And also the owl boxes are not always an immediate cure for a rodent control issue, because it can take time, and also because the owls may or may not actually inhabit the box, and that can take a couple of years. We've got a handful of people in the Nextdoor group who have had boxes up and still so far have not had any owls actually come to live there. So it's not a cure-all, but it certainly it definitely works in many situations. And just a quick note about cameras. If you're going to put a camera in an owl box, really do your research. You have to be really careful about the kinds of cameras that you would choose. Because they can be very disruptive to the owls on the inside. So that just requires a bunch of looking into it. And other than that, we're going to be, Poison-Free Canal Valley is going to be at the Chumash Indian Museum this Saturday, November 13th. And we would love for you to come visit us. We'll be talking about not only poison-free information, but also talking about the owl boxes and the perches. So we would love it for anybody to come and join us and be there. And we have our website. It's poisonfreecanalvalley.com, where we have a lot more information about everything that I just talked about. And that's about it.
I mentioned earlier that I was the director of Poison-Free Agoura. I'm also the director of urban wildlife education and communication for the Old Agoura homeowners, and the co-founder of Cities Against Rat Poison with Poison-Free Malibu. My project focus on alternatives to rodent poisons and coexisting with wildlife. I'm constantly testing out other means of rodent control. In March of 2020, with the help of Kathy Schoonmaker, we installed 2 raptor perches at our home. A lesson learned from this experience is to place a wildlife camera on a tripod aimed at the perch. That way you can see the different types of raptors landing on your pole during the day and evening hours. Because for a while there, I thought maybe there weren't any raptors landing. And then when I saw, as you can see, there are raptors landing on the pole. I do have a camera that I love. It's the Browning Strike Force Pro XD, and that seems to be capturing some really nice nighttime photos and videos. We did something a little bit different than the plans noted on our website and that Kathy mentioned regarding the creation of the raptor perches. Our poles were made for us by a friend of ours who had some spare materials. We improvised on the type of pole, and we used PVC pipe that the perch pole would fit into so we could move it if needed. And here you see some raptors, a couple of crows having fun on the raptor perch. In April of 2020, we partnered with a fantastic wildlife advocate, Julie Newsom, on an owl box project. We thank the Old Agoura Homeowners Board of Directors for helping us with some communication, inquire if neighbors were interested in participating in our study. And we have 4 homes in our study. Julie provided education, donated owl boxes, designed excellent nesting signs, as you can see. We also have a flyer that we include in any of our new neighbor orientation bags. The boxes went up between September 13th and October 26th of 2020, and all the owl boxes are on poles. And at present, we're waiting to see if any of the owls occupy the boxes. I'm aware of around 11 owl boxes in our community, and my next step is to reach out to neighbors to see if their boxes have occupancy and if they are open for Kathy to visit them and take a look at the boxes. My lesson learned is that owl boxes are diverse, and it's important that you purchase a box that can be installed where you want it installed, that being a pole, a tree, or a structure. Something else I wanted to just mention, that on our website, we do have a lot of information, and the poisonfreeagora.com. We have a newsletter that I create called the Critter Chronicle that covers all types of wildlife. We also have a Facebook presence and an Instagram presence, and these are some pictures of some animals that I've captured in Old Agoura. I want to thank Kathy and Bambi and everyone for supporting us and keeping these webinars going. Everyone, I hope you have a great evening, and thank you.